Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Daisy Segovia. I'm the Associate Director of Research and Visualizations here at the RP Group. And today we're going to be talking about rural transfer. So we're here to share some results from our recent study, talking to different practitioners and students across different rural community colleges and talking about what their transfer journeys look like. So today we have an action-packed agenda. First, I'll be going over what we learned from our interviews and focus groups with these practitioners and students, let you know a little bit about what the voices in the field are saying about students' transfer journeys. And then what really is the star of our show today is our panel of 4 different practitioners who are currently working at these rural institutions and speak to them about their different experiences, about what their barriers and different facilitators are that they're facing when they're helping students with transfer. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end to have a little bit of questions and answers. So first, I want to start off with just thanking my team at the RP Group. We had a great team here that's looking into this rural transfer study, as well as different people on our advisory committee members, advisory committee, who have been great at thought partnership, talking through our research questions, insights on how to interpret our different results, and just overall helping us go through this project. So first, I'm going to talk about what we learned from these interviews and focus groups with students. And kind of how this research came about is that we know as community college practitioners and researchers that a university degree really is the key lever for increasing income and inequality. People who have a bachelor's degrees have a higher lifetime earnings in their income, and just more jobs are available to them when you have this bachelor degree. However, we also know that degree attainment is not equal across all these groups or regions. For example, in the California Community College system, 51 of our Latinx students begin their journey at a community college, but only 31% of them transfer within 6 years. Now, throughout the different studies that we have done here at the RP Group, we've noticed that there are regional differences among transfer rates. So we know that these exist and that they are different depending on the location across California. We also know from our research and from other research that there is a positive association between the number of college options a student may have within their vicinity and the likelihood of them enrolling into college. So what we know here is that earning a bachelor's degree is kind of like this great equalizer for like lifetime income, but this often relies, or the system relies on the assumption that a university is geographically accessible to every student. Now, if you take a look at what our California education system looks like, primarily students have 32 different California public universities to attend. They have 23 California State University options and 9 University of California options. But these kind of 32 different campuses have 116 California Community College students to kind of service. So we have 115 community colleges with physical locations across California, and then 1 fully online community college that was recently came into existence. If you look at the map of what that looks like, where these are located, the dots on here on this map indicate where the UCs and the CSUs are located. Now, what we see here first is that they're not equally dispersed across the state, right? There are specific clusters where a majority of them tend to be located. So there's a large cluster up in Northern California around the Bay Area. And there's another cluster kind of along the coast in LA, Orange County, and San Diego. Now, California community colleges spanned even a greater look across greater area than this. California is 116,000 square miles, and they service millions of students. And it can be hard for a student if they don't have this option nearby for them to transfer to a 4-year university. So in our research, we wanted to take a look like how is distance or location affecting transfer rates. And the primary thing that we found was that California, the transfer rates across the colleges are affected by distance. So in this study and our previous research, we mapped university deserts or areas where students have very severely limited proximity to transfer options. And we highlighted their impact on the transfer rates. And essentially what we found is that students attending a community college more than 35 miles from their nearest public California option had lower transfer rates. And those attending a community college even further away at 80 miles had even lower rates. So as you see from the scatter plot here, as the further away the college is from their nearest four-year California option, the lower the transfer rates. Now, interestingly, what we observed from this is that the majority of these colleges that were the furthest away were all situated in rural regions of California. So this kind of led us to our next research question is like, yes, distance is affecting transfer rates, but there kind of an additional layer of where rurality could also be affecting the experiences of these students and their ability to transfer. So this leads us to our current project, where we set out to learn more about what these experiences look like for these rural institutions. And so what we did was we interviewed administrators about transfer facilitation, so what they are doing for their students to help them transfer. And then we also spoke to students about their transfer experiences, so what it's like for them to transfer as being a student at a rural college. In this study, we interviewed 30 college practitioners across 15 different rural colleges, as well as 62 students across 10 rural colleges. And essentially what I'm going to share with you today was just very broad themes about what we learned from these different interviews and focus groups. But later on, we'll have our panel kind of give you specifics about their personal experiences with facilitating transfer for their students. Now, the primary thing that we found is that distance is costing these institutions and these students something. So the current structure kind of inadvertently is imposing like this rural penalty on these geographically isolated institutions. Now, several factors that we found from our interviews and focus groups found that they're affecting the ability of these rural institutions and their students to transfer to a four-year university. Now, while a lot of these factors can impact like any community college students, the main thing that we found is that distance often exacerbated the effects on these students in colleges. So the physical distance often created significant challenges for these communities. And a lot of these factors fall under two main themes. The first one is that distance is costing them money. So distance equals money. There are different financial obligations, different financial considerations that both students and colleges have to take a link to when they are considering whether or not to transfer. And we'll discuss a little bit further about what these specifically mean. But distance also equals connections. So there's different social connections, institutional connections, partnerships that the distance made it additionally harder to create and to sustain because of that additional distance. So primarily what we learned, and I will share a quote from one of our practitioners, is that distance was really the key. Everything is harder because of distance. They haven't seen the college. They don't know what to expect. They have to leave home. They have to get an apartment, etc. All of that is the distance. So when we speak to specifically about this, how this affects students and what their penalty is that there's this additional cost that they have to pay because of how far away they are from their options. So there's this cost of relocation. Transferring often requires moving to expensive urban centers, leading to higher housing costs, higher transportation costs. They often have to leave their local employment. So it's not just having to find a job, it's leaving a job that they already have at the parents. They also might be one of the primary caregivers in their family. So there's these family sustaining wages that they're also giving up if they transfer. And a lot of students, when we spoke to them, they were discussing that this kind of distance penalty, this additional cost that they have to pay, is often enough to deter them from transferring to a university altogether. When we spoke to students about what helped them kind of alleviate these costs, they said that cost saving measures were really essential. So things like tuition reciprocation programs where they could pay in-state tuition if they go out of state, for example, was really one of the key things that a lot of people talked about. Open educational resources would kind of help students find courses that offer like free or reduced cost textbooks were really essential to kind of reducing those costs. And especially coordinating between colleges and the university partners provided like this clear continuity and clear guidance to help them avoid things as like taking courses that they didn't have to take, avoiding having to take redundant courses, which ultimately saved them both time and money. As one student kind of said when we talked to them about like what financial things they have to take into account, they said, I am one of the contributing members of my household to keep the house afloat. If I physically go, that's going to put a financial strain on my family. So it's not just the distance itself, but what is that cost of that distance? The distance for these students is also costing them connections or difficulty making these partnerships. So when we spoke to students about what really helped them, social capital was really critical. And essentially, what social capital is like these networks of peers, family support, community ties that kind of give them these opportunities to make these connections to help them along their journey. So when they are deciding whether or not to transfer, they're often shaped by these strong community ties. So they're really dedicated to staying close to their family or to their community, but there's these severe transportation limitations. So when students had social capital, it was really a critical key to making sure they persisted in the transfer journey as well as help them succeed. So, for example, one student said, I would say that support is one of the important ones. I would say that without my family's support in the background and the guidance of my mentors, such as my professors or people in the math lab, continuing that momentum would be difficult. So, really having those personal ties, like such families, friends, to kind of show them the way, having people at the community colleges, such as staff, instructors, and counselors, to let them know what they need to do, and having also those connections at the transfer university to get them, that kind of the next step was really helpful for students to help them succeed in their transfer journeys. Now, when we speak about the institutional penalty of what this distance is costing the institutions themselves, so the colleges themselves, a lot of what we heard is that rural colleges need to spend more to deliver comparable service to their students. So rural colleges are really facing this dual challenge. They are held to the identical performance standards as maybe their urban counterparts might do. So they still have to get their students graduated. They still have to get their students to course completion. They still have to get their students to transfer. But they are often operate with smaller budgets to mainly due to like enrollment means funding models. And a lot of the funding models currently rely on this like fallacy of uniform conditions, where like this kind of one size fits all approach kind of systemically penalizes rural institutions. For example, a lot of the practitioners that we spoke to brought up the 50% law, which if you're not familiar is when 50% of their budget has to be spent on instructional costs. And often a lot of these transfer resources or support fall on the other side of that 50% law. So, for example, because of rural, one practitioner said, because of small rural colleges are so greatly impacted by the 50% law, we cannot offer the same amount of services. Our general funds are small. And then you think about the fact that we have technology and software, counseling, and librarians, all of that support services and then all the operational things that make college functionals are on the wrong side. So, speaking to that, they are not instructional costs. So really what these institutions have to do is they must innovate by necessity. They have to uh, get different funding sources. They have to restructure how they spend. They have to redistribute resources differently. They have to consolidate staff roles to maintain these kind of service levels. A lot of these practitioners talked about having to wear different hats. So one person was the transfer director and the athletic director, and also an instructor and a counselor. So a lot of these smaller institutions are having to spread thin and really divide the work among a smaller number of people because of their size and because of the budget allocations. Now, because of their location, it's also harder to kind of create partnerships, especially with the transfer institutions. A lot of the practitioners we spoke to talked about how hard it is to get UC reps to come to them to their transfer fairs to kind of do that subs. So for rural colleges, having these strategic partnerships were really an engine of innovation, and then it enabled them to overcome their geographic isolations by employing bold strategies that were fundamentally transforming their access pathways for their students. So a lot of these partners talked about partnering with the out-of-state institutions and making sure they had kind of reciprocal agreements so their students could go there. They talked about having partnerships with different communities around them to just kind of help them additionally get their students those resources. So, for example, one practitioner said, as long as they know what they're supposed to do to transfer to a UC and CSU, the students are pretty much accepted into this out-of-state university that they had this partnership with. So, really developing those partnerships was important for these colleges to help their students transfer. So, what is it that we can do, perhaps, about these different barriers that we found for rural colleges? In our report, we talk about three different things that we think will help the institutions and to help the students transfer. So, first, the thing we have to do is strengthen the transfer in degree compatriot culture on campusness. So, we really need to institutionalize and fund these kind of vital social and financial supports. So making sure that the colleges have enough funding for transfer fairs, for campus tours, to kind of create a transfer culture within their college so that students can see themselves as a transfer student. Second, we think that we should be able to expand place-based baccalaureate degree options. So instead of the student having to go somewhere else to get their bachelor's degrees, we bring the education to them. So focusing on bringing educational opportunities to the student where they are locally, so they don't have to kind of debate whether it is worth leaving their family and their communities behind. Another thing that we could really to focus on is to address this role penalty that is often imposed on these colleges. So creating more flexible and student-centered funding that takes into account the location and the region, and how this funding is affecting them, so that they can better utilize that money to support their students. So taking into consideration location, as well as perhaps having some expanding, what we can do with the money, for example, in the 50% law. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a brief overview of what we found in our interviews and focus groups. But now I really want to move on to our panel. Well, they'll be speaking specifically about what they've seen in their different colleges, and how they help their students transfer. So today we have four different practitioners from across the state. Um, we have Davis Murphy, the Dean of Student Services from Lassen College. We have Antonio Benitez, the Director of the Lake Tahoe College Promise at Lake Tahoe Community College. And we have Regan Dozier, a Director of the Student Success Program, MESA Coordinator from Porterville College, and Haley Matson, the EOPS Care Counselor currently at San Bernardino Valley College, but at the time that we interviewed her, she was working at Copper Mountain College. So I'm going to start off first with asking a question to each of you about what we heard from today. So I kind of reviewed different quotes and themes about what we learned from our transfer students and college practitioners. What was one finding that made you really like nod your head and say like, this is exactly what we're seeing on our campus? And we'll start it over here from the furthest north. So Davis Murphy, if you'll start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Davis Murphy. I'm the Dean of Student Services at Lassen College. So just to give those that don't know where we're located, we're in Susanville, California. We're about 80 miles north of Reno, Nevada. So we're just kind of right inside the border. I think the one thing that really stuck out to me is that distance equals money. For us, it didn't just show up for the students, but also the institution too, because when you talk about budget constraints, and I would say that the funding formula is definitely not equitable for us rural community colleges, and we felt that. Our students, they see it all the time with distance. For them, they got to drive over the hill, and on any given day, like today, they're snowing up over the mountains, and for them to make it to the nearest CSU, which for us is Chico State, it becomes impossible because the road's closed. So that's not only, a safety risk, but then the housing costs, the low, lost income potentially because they're not able to work, they're leaving their family. And those are real things that our students face. And I think, one of the biggest thing is looking at the penalties, such as distance penalty that you mentioned, Daisy, is that we have fewer resources, limited staff. Our transfer department is one person. We have a transfer center director that is also a counselor, but we have a transfer center coordinator, and that's it. And she's currently on the road today, and she's at Sacramento State, so with some students. So it's just, it's that constant balancing act, wearing multiple hats. But really for us is distance. It's not just creating a barrier; it's multiplying them for our students as well as the institution. So it makes it really, really difficult.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Definitely the wearing of many hats was something that we heard a lot throughout our interviews. Antonio, is there anything that kind of resonated with you?
Yes, thank you. The quote that stood out with me the most is the one with students say, I am one of the contributing members of the household to keep our household afloat. And if I physically go, that's going to put financial strain on my family. So it's not just about distance, but what is the cost of distance? The amount of conversations that I've had with students revolving around that, just for context, in our Promise program, about 60% of our students receive some form of financial aid. So they are being part of the contributing members of their household is that's not just the financial weight, but the psychological weight of like, I have to physically move to go to a four-year university. Now I can't help financially because it's costly to go to university, and there's a psychological burden. What is my family going to think of me just picking up and going? And I've had several conversations with as place-bound students. We are fortunate to have a university center here with a couple of partnerships for those students that can't or won't physically move, where they can get a bachelor's degree here in place. So we do have kind of a unique situation going on here. But anecdotally, the theme is pretty constant with students that can't or won't transfer. It revolves around the finances and how it's going to affect their household.
Yes, I think oftentimes, the decision to transfer is not just how it affects you, but how has it affected my family and those around me, right? Reagan, anything to share about what we resonated with?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that Davis talked about the student's experience. And what I wanted to emphasize from this particular piece that and what came out of it was the fact that the strategic partnerships that institutions have to make in order for us to be able to get to the four-year institutions. One of the college practitioners in the study said that there's also a barrier with even our university reps coming out here because of the distance. It's been difficult to get face-to-face in exchanges with UC reps, Cal Poly reps. That is a institutional reality for Porterville College. We are about an hour away from the closest public institutions, either direction, north or south. And it's very difficult for us to work with a lot of the other four-year public institutions because of the fact that it's hard for them to come to Porterville College, for them to provide those resources for students. And when Davis talked about the connections piece for students, the social capital, our students really need to be able to know someone in those particular locations in order for them to feel comfortable to move to these, these urban areas, when they spent their whole life within these small communities and they don't necessarily have the resources to be able to get the lower costing rent for people know that they can live with multiple other people. This is all just jumping in full force. And more like colleges like Porterville College, like we try our best to develop relationships with university reps, with trying to we currently have a partnership with CSU East Bay, so that we can, which has online options for our students, so to ensure that our students are able to get somewhere and they're able to stay in their particular location. But that really spoke to me because it is so difficult for colleges that are further away from the institutions for us to get any face time with them.
Yeah, we always talk about students going somewhere, but it's just as hard to get someone to come to us, right? To get those reps and for students to really see themselves, that it's a possibility. Thank you for sharing that. Haley, anything from you?
Yeah, definitely. So, just to frame my perspective a little bit, a lot of my answers are going to come from my time at Copper Mountain College. I'm now at San Bernardino Valley College, so a slightly different population. But I think one that stuck out for me that I really was not expecting was that one staff member is a lot of the time filling multiple roles on a college campus. As a college counselor, I think that, when these results came out, I was expecting the barriers that students face because that is what I hear on an everyday basis. But to hear that other colleges are going through a similar staffing situation where you have the quote was that you had a counselor that was also running the transfer center and was seeing all of the student athletes. At Copper Mountain College, we had a very similar situation where the transfer center coordinator was also the articulation officer. And in a time of Cal Getsy and Common Course numbering, where the articulation officer is just so busy with a lot of other very important, timely manners going on, things like transfer initiatives, doing field trips, hosting different workshops can seem to go under the wayside. And it really does come with not only those strategic partnerships that are coming from four-year institutions, but also interdepartmentally. And I think that that is one thing that we have to keep in mind too, is when we have multiple people or one person doing multiple roles, we have to get a lot of buy-in from different parts of the campus, and whether that is for funding because we need EOPS to pay for this event, or we need this to come from general funds, whatever that may be. It often requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of creative thinking just to get things done that other campuses that aren't necessarily coming from a rural environment may take for granted.
Yes, thank you for that. Um, And we're going to stick with you for a second since you talked about how you are now at San Bernardino Valley College and on Copper. So I know how I shared like how this rule penalty really exacerbates these barriers for our students. And since you kind of made that leap from like an isolated region to, we'll say, a less isolated region, I think San Bernardino probably still has some of that geographical effect on it. But what does the rule penalty look like when you're sitting across from a student and you're trying to explain like their plan for transfer, and how have your experiences like different from these two different institutions?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say honestly, what I think the biggest difference is the rural penalty really comes with having to plan early on. In my time here at San Bernardino Valley College, if I have a student that tells me that they are undecided on where they want to transfer, we have a little bit more time to figure that out because Cal State San Bernardino is in our backyard. If that's going to be their first, or if their first choice, or if they want to have that as a backup school, there is busing and transportation that is available for them to get to a four-year institution that would not necessarily require them to change a lot of their life that they already have now. And that was not the case at Copper Mountain College. So if I had a student that in their first semester, which is normal for our students to say, hey, I don't really know where I want to transfer, we had to have a serious conversation earlier on to say, hey, I know that you're undecided. I know that this can feel scary, but I'm asking you this, and it's something that I need you to really look into and start thinking about because we have to start planning holistically for that. And that takes time. So, in appointments, we just had to do a lot more life planning. So if they're planning on transferring, are they wanting to relocate? Are they planning on moving? If they do, if not, you want to stay where you're at. Do you have a reliable car to be able to transfer? Do we need to start kind of planning what that's going to look like financially for you to get to a point where that's realistic? Housing, having these conversations early on of if you are looking to live on campus or off campus, if you're wanting to relocate, are we going to have to find you a new job? I think one thing that is really important to note we at Copper Mountain had a lot of students that were wanting to go to school fully online, so that way they wouldn't have to relocate. And a lot of students do want to continue with the Cal State system. That's the system that, they're most readily familiar with. And with the Cal State's fully online programs, a lot of those are offered by extension programs, which means that their tuition is significantly higher if they decide to go in a fully online program opposed to in person. So that makes it very hard for our students because then they have to decide on tuition that may be slightly more affordable or staying where they're at, going fully online, but knowing that they may have to pay more out of pocket. And additionally, just for our students that are place bound and can't leave for whatever reason that is, not all majors are offered fully online at four-year institutions. So for our students that are wanting to go into social work, that are wanting to become teachers, a lot of these things that have an internship component built into it, it makes it almost impossible for them. So I think when we talk about really what that penalty is, it's that we have to have a lot more life planning and a lot more holistic counseling, and just really doing everything that we can to get these students in a place that if they decide to leave, they can.
Right. So really one of the penalties is that they can't afford to take their time and be undecided, and they kind of have to have that all that decided upon on the get-go, right? So you just don't have that luxury of taking your time with those types of things, right? Because not only does it take longer to actually drive somewhere, it's, you know, gonna take you longer to kind of make these decisions.
Yeah.
Uh, so thank you for very much for sharing that. Antonio, I wanted to ask you because you are, the director of the Lake Tahoe Promise. Um, Taking kind of that individual student experience, how does like a structured initiative like that Promise program aim to address or like mitigate these kind of compounded geographic barriers that a student might face at your college?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the ways that we've been addressing this issue is by having a required transfer class. It's called Understanding Transfer that is taught by one of our counselors. And this recommendation actually came out of UC Davis wheelhouse external evaluation of the program several years back, and we immediately implemented it. And so students have to complete this class before they end their first year of community colleges. And so this gives us the opportunity that so that they have all of the information anywhere from getting your PIQs ready, get all the transfer courses, learning about student loans, all of that good stuff, so that by the time the application's open the following fall, they already have all of that information. So it reduces the mental stress of what does the process looks like. They're doing it with the counselor. I know folks talked earlier about using different funding sources to fund transfer trips. We do that with EOPS, Equity, Student Accessibility Services. I think that's pretty common, having overnight trips so that students know what the on-campus dorm experience looked like as well, so they could actually get a feel for it. And we do that through a K3, K16 collaborative grant that allows us to get those funds and give students the opportunity to spend those overnight trips at these four-year universities. So having the structure of a required class has significantly helped our students. And this last fall, 2 falls ago, actually, was the first time it was a requirement. Prior to that, it was highly encouraged. But now we said if you want to be in the Promise program, you have to take the class. Now there are some minor exceptions. If someone's in the fire academy and says, "Hey, I got a job as soon as I'm done with the fire academy," we're not going to make the student take that class. We have another one that is called Career and Life Planning, but that class also has a segment on transfer. So even if they take the alternative class, they're still going to learn about transfer.
Awesome. Yeah. So really speaking to how you have to be really innovative, right? Because your students face different barriers and how do you get that those resources and the information that they need. So I love that you have that, that transfer class for your students. I'm going to kind of pivot over to talking about like the institutional burden. Davis and Reagan, I know you kind of both spoke to kind of that aspect at your colleges. So this first question is for Davis. We highlighted that that kind of role penalty falls a lot on on the institution. And oftentimes you guys are held to those same metrics as, colleges in urban centers. But the funding kind of models are could be not in your favor. So kind of from your perspective, because you're a dean, what does that innovation by necessity really look like when you have to maintain like a robust transfer support with like these limited resources?
Yeah, so I really really love innovation by necessity because I feel like that is, on a daily basis, that's what we're needing to do is just be innovative in everything we do. Sometimes, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but for us, we've had to, just with our unique challenges that we've had. So really, how can we deliver the same transfer support that urban institutions are giving, but with fewer people, less funding, higher costs? And I think, for me, I can really, really relate to it because, wearing multiple hats is something that we all on our campus have to do on a daily basis. For me, just to kind of highlight real quick everything that I oversee, I am our financial aid director, I am our registrar, I oversee our counseling department, our transfer. I oversee athletics, I oversee our cafeteria, I oversee all student discipline, and I oversee our residence hall. So, for me, I understand what it means to wear multiple hats so that I can better direct and better assist, our employees that we have that are working together on transfer. And for us, I mean, it's been mentioned before, is just how can we piece together funding? We understand that one source of funding is not going to get it done. So we do have trio support services on our campus. So we try to use that, work with the other um, support departments, and how can we pull that money together, bring all the students together to take a bus of them to a university, or even though if we don't have enough, they're going to a van, because for us to get the CSUs and UCs to come here, we see it every year. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. They might RSVP to our college day every fall, but they no show, and that's just a reality. We see it every single year. Um, so for us, it's, transfer, it becomes everyone's job on campus. Is at the end of the day, we're here to not only, assist students in receiving their associate's degree certificate, whichever path they're looking to go down, but we're also looking at the bigger picture, which is transferring on to that university. We don't have a bachelor's degree program locally yet. We're actively working on that, but for us, it's, how can we develop those relationships, those connections with the universities to make sure that we can put somebody, face to face that they can talk to, learn to get to know, because our students are a perfect example of those that they get really, really used to that personal connection on a small campus. And we've been able to see that where they're the most successful when they leave here is when they also develop that personal relationship at that CSU or UC that they end up transferring to. So understanding that, it's just how do we set them up for success here, which will then set them up for success at the next stop. So all in all, it's just, we're just trying to be strategic, with less, but not by doing less, still by doing everything that we need to do. And then, it's a challenge, but our numbers are increasing over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years now. It's working. And I think for us, now that we're starting to see that, it's just even more motivation to keep going in the direction that we're going.
Right. Yeah. I love what you just said about you work with less, but you're not doing less. So really, I think that if that's one big theme we found across all this, it's that. Thank you. Reagan, I know that you also work, as a director of the student success programs. So, kind of jumping off of what Davis says, how do you see how like this running on lean kind of really trickles down, and how do you sustain like effective student success programming when you have these people that have to wear multiple hats?
Absolutely. And I love that Davis listed all his areas he oversees because I'm going to list all the areas I oversee too. And I want to emphasize also our classified professionals also take on this amount of work, and so do our faculty. So it's not just administrative level, it's at all levels at a campus, particularly at Porterville College. So what I do as Director of Student Success Programs, I oversee our Business Innovation Center, our STEM Innovation Center, our Literacy Innovation Center, our Learning Center, our Testing Center, our library, our MESA program, our PASO program, Experiential Learning Opportunities, Rural Initiatives, which includes like our non-credit expansion. So those are just some of the things like I particularly oversee on our particular campus. So sustainability, we really have to be more, you have to be intentional about our integration and the way that we do things. For example, one of our biggest strategies that we utilize at Porterville College, particularly in academic support services, is that we leverage cross-functional collaboration. So originally, all these programs were separated on my particular campus, and within the last, since I've overseen them, we've aligned all of our all of our programming under what we call it the Strive framework, which is service, training, research, intellectual rigor, vocational clinical experiences, engagement, and leadership. And all of our programs are aligned under that. And we have 8 competencies that we have each of our areas, our programs fall under. And if their programs don't fall under those key areas, then we understand that those may be not something that we can particularly take on for our particular services that we provide for our students. And this is all just information and things that we've, taken. I've taken my team, we've gone to other colleges and universities because we wanted to learn, even if they were bigger than ours, how can they sustain the growth that they have in their particular programs and do the things that they do. So we heavily modeled this after University of California, San Diego's model. They had core competencies in their learning commons. They have a key framework that they align everything under. And by aligning everything under a particular framework, with having that cross collaborative support and integration, we're able to ensure that exactly what Davis is talking about. If we're going to go take students to go transfer, our MESA program can pay for a portion of it, our PASO program can pay for a portion of it, maybe our library pays for a portion of it, and then integrating all those budgets in order for us to be able to offer the same services that students would get at a bigger school than they would, we always say at Porterville College, start small and go big, but we want to ensure that even when they start here with the smaller classrooms, that they get the same experiences. Because we say the transfer degree you get at Porterville College is the same transfer degree you get in LA. So we have to be able to provide those services, and that's the way we've leveraged it and been able to offer it to our students. And I would say that it's building strong relationships and social capital on behalf of our students. Because we understand that our students' social capital is very location bound, we ensure that we build relationships within other areas in California in order for our students to have a safe spot that they can fall back on. And what I mean by that is that we have an alumni network in our academic support services, because under that I oversee our student workers, which are tutoring, past leaders, math mentors, and all those incredible programs. And within that, we have our MESA students that we have who graduate every year, our PASO students, which is our adult learner program, and we keep a network of them on LinkedIn so that, and we monitor, we ask them, where are you going to go when you transfer? And we reach back out to them on behalf of our students when they decide they want to go to those particular institutions so that they have a connection with somebody within those areas. Currently at Cal Poly Pomona, we have 3 students that were from our program that our students have reached out to and they've come back to our campus to speak to. We have 2 students over at Berkeley who have come back and spoken to our students, and creating those connections, that social capital on behalf of our students has been immensely important for us.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So the one thing I'm coming off of what you said is like teamwork makes the dream work, right? So you really have to call in everybody and make sure that everyone is on the same page about like what it takes to get our students there. And I like that you mentioned the social capital because I think that was one of the key things that we learned from when we talked to students is like really having those connections was really important. So just kind of posing a question to anyone on the panel about like have you implemented any kind of bold strategy to kind of create this social capital for your students to build these like crucial relationships despite the distance. So anyone who wants to speak to that.
I can go.
Yeah,
Um,
Hallie.
so during my time at Copper Mountain, I'm actually extremely lucky to have been part of a team that implemented a new counseling model that did this. So what we did was we realized that we had a large percentage of students that were getting into the UCs and Cal States, but they weren't going. And that was because they didn't necessarily know everything they needed to be doing, after they got accepted or what that process really looked like. So what we did was per unit breakdown. So we had unit breakdowns from 0 to 14, 15 to 29, 30 to 45, and so on, where it really listed out for students everything that they needed to be doing in addition to just passing their classes. So, in that first semester, you need to make sure that you're meeting with a counselor. You need to make sure that you are attending the transfer fairs that we have. So that way you can kind of get familiar with different institutions and visiting the Career Center to possibly take some career assessments. I think we have to realize that for a lot of our students, they don't know what they don't know. And it's oftentimes not your classes that is the hardest part of college. It's navigating all of the other stuff. So we really tried to create a clear roadmap for students and letting them know what all of those extra things are that they should be doing every semester. So that way they are creating that social capital for themselves and really creating the opportunity for them to move forward. And whether that is preparing them to enter the workforce or for transferring, just making sure they are building those skills in addition to what they're learning in their courses.
Awesome, great. I really love that you're kind of thinking ahead for your students, right? Thinking about like what you can provide for them. Anyone else want to share something maybe that they've done to build that social capital for their students?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in. So the belonging is really is one of my key areas that I've been really working on. We participated in the Equity Accelerator project that was through the Chancellor's office this past fall, where we had some students participate in like their belonging project. We had about 175 students who participated in it, and through the data that we were able to discern, like the students that participated in it, which was had like key terminology from like people who had transferred before and like they were able to get their, it was really interactive for our students. They had higher belonging persistence rates for our particular campus, and it was quite incredible to be able to see. And based on that particular project, we implemented into our Mesa and our PASO program. But based on that project, we started working with the Circle of Champions, which have done they do mentorship. So you have your every student who participates in it, they put themselves and then they put five of their mentors that they indicate. It could be personal, it could be people within the programs, and they're able to ask them questions about things to build their social capital so that they can feel supported and they can feel like they can do this. And we wanted to implement this in the next coming in our fall semester. We have some new courses that are being developed that were developed by our MESA program from our faculty, and they're going to implement that in the fall semester. And we really think that's going to help showcase our students like how to develop social capital because I know that's something that we talk about and it's something that we discuss in theory for our students, but it's not something that they necessarily understand. Particularly in our rural environments, we always tell them like it's all the people that you know, and you ask questions whenever you're going to take a class. You're like, "Hey, cousin, Like, you took this class before. Is this a good class? But they don't see it as that. So we wanted to have a formal model in order for our students to truly understand when we say, like, the people that you bring with you and the people who help support you and the people that mentor you are the ones who are going to make sure that you can go far. And we want our students to see beyond just Porterville. This is a great, fantastic place that we understand that a lot of them are location bound, but to see what they can do and what they can participate in and what they can be beyond these walls.
Yeah, I think that leading by example is really critical because it kind of alleviates some of that anxiety, right, of the unknown. So I think that's really important to make sure your students realize the importance of that social capital. Antonio, I know you were going to unmute yourself, so I don't know if you wanted to share something really quickly about that.
Yeah, I think based off of what was said earlier, I would say, yeah, connecting students to alumni that have transferred before, but also open your own network, open your Rolodex to them, right? If you know a student's transferring to a university and you got homies over there, hit them up. Be like, hey, I got a student. Do you have 15 minutes to sit with them, Zoom with them, and then can you help them out? Can you connect them? Once they get there, ensure that they're connecting with the people that they need to and they have someone that they're arriving there because we can't always do that with every institution. But the world of higher ed is a small world. It's big, but it's also small. And if you open up your network, I think that also expedites the process for our students and helps them feel comfortable to be like, hey, I may not know this person coming in, but I know that they're going to be there and I can come over to their office or they're going to connect me to the right people once I'm there. So if you already do it, and if not, then open up that network book. Help them out. Send a LinkedIn email to a LinkedIn note to someone. Say, hey, I have a student. Do you have 15 minutes? So I would say that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. So anybody needs me to talk to a student, I'm open. So thank you. I have one final question for all of our panelists before we open it up for Q&A. I know we have like a diverse panel here of administrators, student facing, admin, and all that. If we want to leave this webinar today and change just like one practice to like better support students, what do you think that should be? Just quick lightning round here. We'll start with you, Davis.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just being intentional about developing those relationships. And, as Antonio just mentioned, is we've utilized, our student network that we're like, hey, we know students that have gone to Cal Poly Humboldt, and we're putting them in touch with those students. And I think that's really, really helped, especially with our TRIO program. So I think it's being intentional um, about that, but then also letting the students know and the staff know this is not, a something that you're doing alone. It's a group effort. Everybody's on the same page, and we're all here to help, as well as the students making sure that they're set up for success. So I think it's just really just being intentional about what transfer means, especially as a rural institution, and how can we all work together and collaborate to see some changes being made in the system, but then also prove what we are doing as these small rural institutions, and we're small but mighty.
Yes, yeah, intentionality I think is very important. Thank you. Antonio.
Yeah, this one, it sounds super obvious, but I don't think people do this enough. It's just encouraging students to apply. Just get that application in there, right? Ask them, where are you transferring to? How many schools have you applied? Especially for our students that qualify for financial aid. Last time I checked, it could qualify for 4 free CSUs and 4 UC applications. Let's maximize all of those. The amount of students that I've sat down with that thought they weren't going to transfer because they couldn't afford it. Once we sat down and we looked at their financial aid package, they're getting like 90% free rides. And now that changed the equation in their head. A year ago, they weren't sure if they're going to transfer. Now, when they're seeing those financial aid packages, now not everyone gets the same package, but a lot of them do, and it opens the opportunity versus a year ago, they weren't sure if they were going to transfer. So just encouraging them to get that application out there, help them with their PIQs, and then let the universe take care of the rest. We'll see what that looks like a year from now.
Yeah, you miss all the shots you don't take, right? So you got to make sure you encourage the students to do that. Reagan, one practice you might want to change to better support your students?
What I'm realizing more and more is that developing a college going culture and transfer culture is critical to student success, and that I can't emphasize it enough that we need to ensure that we are in all levels of in education from K through 12, getting to students so that they understand that going to college is the expectation, not the exception, and that this is where they belong and this is where they can make impactful differences, particularly when I think about the economic disadvantages that our students undergo living in these in particular areas, and knowing that if they were to get into the pathway towards transfer, that they would be able to drastically help assist their families. So I think that's where I'm at, is that we need to develop a college going culture within these areas.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to a lot what if a lot of people talked about, like, is if they can see themselves, they can get there, and also to see the benefits of like what that degree has done for some other people. So I love that thinking. And then Hallie, the last.
Yeah, mine is going to be short and sweet, but I think it's really just building in those systems that get your counselors and your students to really holistically plan for transfer as early as possible.
Yes, get start. What do you hit the ground running, right? Just like people say. So we don't have that luxury of taking our time. So yes, I love that. So we have a few minutes left before the hour is up. So I do want to open it up to the audience if they have any questions. There's a couple here in our Q&A section here. Someone asked, or someone mentioned that their financial aid department has gotten real strict on classes that don't fit into our degrees. For some, it could take so for some, it could work under a transfer elective, but for any high unit transfer programs, they have to work with them for some sort of allowance. So not necessarily a question, but I don't know if anyone can speak to how you kind of navigate like what financial aid might or might not allow.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. And what we're doing is that we've been very creative in working with our counselors to find find a program that it would ultimately fit under. So it might be a degree change, but what we're doing is in the system, just to be able to still meet the Department of Ed requirements, is ensuring that that course does fit into that additional degree. And then when it comes time to petition to graduate, is potentially they're going to then walk away with more than just the one degree that they were going for. And really trying to work with the counselor on that, walk through. It is a case by case thing, obviously, but we've tried to get really really creative. And for me, I enjoy that challenge. I enjoy working through those with students because um, I get to kind of bridge that gap between counseling's understanding and financial aid's understanding, and it becomes a really good learning opportunity for the employees as well that benefits the student in the end.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and it really speaks to how you have to wear multiple hats, right? You just don't have one lane that you need to know about. So I like that you're coordinating that across departments. Antonio, there was this question I believe you already answered in there, but just in case other people want to know this information about as well. You're all about transfer course. You want to speak to the structure about that and whether it's like credit based or kind of how you navigate that course?
Yes, so it's a 2 unit course and it's actually transferable too as well. And so that course, I need to talk with our team on how we were able to push that one forward. I think, but ultimately, I think seeing the value per recommendation from UC Davis Wheelhouse, us wanting to increase our transfer numbers because our transfer numbers at an institution level are below 20%, right? Between 12 and 18, fluctuating with the last 4 or 5 years. Don't quote me on the numbers, but they're pretty low. And so I think the institutional will to want to overcome those barriers, right? And how do we make the case for the policymakers and the lawmakers to see the value in that when we want to increase those? And some of it is if it's internal, right? If it's a policy and procedure that's localized, and to me, that's not a barrier for that we can't overcome. Now, if there's laws that we have to abide by, that might take a little bit of um, tug of war, but I think those can also be overcome as well. As far as the content that is being taught, I think I alluded to that a little bit earlier, but it's the pre-application process. What are student loans? Working through the application process for CSUs, UCs, and sometimes private institutions as well, and then just making sure you're getting your transfer requirements. Um, any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that course. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come through, so I just want to really iterate how thankful I am that you all made the time to, first of all, participate in our interviews. I know that was the time that you could have used somewhere else, another hat that you had to put on. So thank you for putting on that hat for us and sharing your experiences. I really think this project and this report is really opening people's eyes about really this rule penalty that's you all and your students are having to pay because of you're located. So thank you again for coming here today and to sharing your experiences with us. If anybody has any questions, either for me or anyone on our team, or any of our panelists, feel free to reach out. My email here, I can get you in touch with anybody that spoke here today. If you want to take a look at our project page, the website is there, or you can access the report that should be live now on our website. If not, I am typing it into the chat. And basically just thank you, everybody. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you, Haley, Regan Davis, and Antonio for sharing your thoughts and your experiences.